This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And speaking of the union, Jay, we have a union member back with us. He was here last year. He's back again. He's bringing us an album to check out. Welcome back, Darren Lehman. How are you?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me again.
I just realized we had a little coincidence here. Darren's from Kingston, and we just did a Kingston band.
Did Headstones. You guys just did the Headstones. Yeah.
We're going to crack that Kingston market one way or another.
Headstones, Tragically Hip, home of David Usher from Moist.
Oh.
The Glorious Sons, up-and-coming rock band. Sarah Harmer, also a really well-known Canadian artist. So
she's performed with the Hip, right?
Yes, she has. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's been a musical hotbed over years past and stuff. So
I didn't realize that, but I'm glad
take a trek to Kingston and
beautiful city. It's on the water. Yeah,
it is. How far is it from the border? From Buffalo, Niagara Falls, that area.
That's about 4 hours, but you can go like Ogdensburg, Canton, Potsdam way, and that's about an hour, roughly. Watertown is about an hour-ish. So,
okay.
The northern New York.
Oh, okay. You go a little further north. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So we're not far.
So obviously you brought us a Kingston, Ontario band that we haven't. No.
I wish I could have.
Did we tap out all? We've done Moist. We've done Headstones. We've done Tragically Hip. We haven't done Sarah Harmer. Yeah. I was going to get there eventually. I just needed to work through all the options.
All the vowels.
Harmer.
No, Heimer. There's some other Canadian groups I would like to cover someday, but you know what? They can wait. I've liked this album for a long time. So
share with the audience what you picked.
So I picked an album by the band Face to Face, and it is called Ignorance Is Bliss.
Yes. Face to Face, a band that I think has been brought up maybe once or twice in the podcast, but we haven't actually dug into them. So thank you, because this has been long overdue. Based on, they have a compelling story, and this is a compelling album to talk about. Mm-hmm. This is their fourth record. We're gonna do everybody who's been angry that I haven't been dropping a history of the band jingle. History of the band jingle right now. It's dropping right now.
History of the band.
This is a band from Victorville, California, formed in 1991. Well, actually 88 is that's when Trevor Keith, Matt Riddell, who were high school friends, along with Todd and Matt Atmeyer, who were guitar and drums, they formed a band called Victoria Manor, and it lasted a couple years. That disbanded, and then Keith and Riddle formed a new band called Zero Tolerance with drummer Rob Kurth and guitarist Mark Hake. They never made a record. They had a demo tape. They decided to go in a new musical direction because it was kind of a metal band, and they wanted to do something different. So they changed the name to Face to Face. That's when Mark Hake left, and they continued on as a three-piece. They toured a little bit around that area, and then they got into a studio in Hollywood, California in October 91 and recorded their first album, Don't Turn Away, which was released in 1992 on it was on Dr. Strange Records, and then it was re-released on Fat Records. Little play on words there. Big Choice, their next record came out in 1995. That was released on Victory Records in 95 and then re-released on A&M Records. And Disconnected was served up to alternative radio. That was their first radio single that was pushed. And then they put out a self-titled record in 96. And that was also on A&M Records. And that is the first with Scott Shiflett on bass. He's the brother, trivia, of Chris Shiflett of the Foo Fighters.
Yes.
He's also in the Me First and the Gimme Gimmes, I believe.
Yes.
And then, so you've got 3 albums, all on different record labels to start, and then the 2 of them make it to A&M, and then they go to Beyond Records, which is an interesting choice because it was best known for not punk music. They bring Rob Kurth leaves on drums, and Pete Parada is on drums, and Ignorance Is Bliss comes out in July of 1999. Also, in 99, they released a covers album called Standards and Practices, and that came out on Vagrant Records. 2000, Reactionary, that was also on Vagrant, and this is their last album with guitarist Chad Yarrow. 2002, How to Ruin Everything, that was also on Vagrant, and then they broke up. They got back together and released Laugh Now, Laugh Later in 2011 on People Like You Records. 3 Chords and a Half Truth, released on Rise Records in 2013. Protection, released in 2016 on Fat Records. It was the first album recorded with new guitarist Dennis Hill after Yarrow left the band again. And then this past year, they released, is it this past year or was it this year? No Way Out But Through, out on Fat Records again. I think it was maybe last fall.
I was going to say September, I think.
Yeah.
2021. Yeah.
They've had a couple of live albums, a whole bunch of EPs that have come out, sometimes a split EP with bands like Horace Pinker, Dropkick Murphys, and Rise Against. And then they've also had a number of compilation albums. They did an acoustic sessions in 2008, and then they did a second Standards and Practices release in 2020. And that's about it for the band. Jay, had you listened to Face to Face before this episode?
I don't know that I had. I had a conception of what they were like. I think just because of who they came up, our roundtables that they came up in, or being associated with different bands. I sort of thought of them as some kind of pop punk sound, but I don't know that I ever heard them.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever actually actively listened to the band. They might have heard them in college when they were getting played in college radio, but I don't recall.
Yeah.
But this is my first exposure to a full record of theirs, which I believe Eric Grubbs is going to murder me in my sleep because I think he's a huge Face to Face fan. And if he hears this and he finds out I never actually listened to the band, he might get upset. So I pre-apologize, Eric.
Well, here we are.
We're rectifying that error.
This is what we do here. We dig up records we've never heard before.
We got some comments over at Patreon. Ian McIver said, I think this album fell into the CD trap of must be between 50 and 60 minutes. It sounds like a skate punk band going alt rock. A bit of filler on the album, but there's a strong EP here. After seeing how the poll was going and other comments, I gave the album another listen. Unfortunately, it didn't change my opinion, but maybe if I was a bit more familiar with the band and their peers, I might be more in line with the others. Sorry. Kyle Bittner said, if I'm not mistaken, this album was overlooked and panned by a number of fans because of the quote unquote shift in sound. What a bunch of bullshit.
Boom.
They took their speedy skate punk sound and slowed it down a notch. So did every other skate punk band in the 90s, like Bad Religion, Lagwagon, and to a certain degree, NoFX, among others. Why go after a band like Face to Face? Most punk bands around this time tried their hand at an alt-rock sound. It still has the hooks, melody, and musicianship of early albums. Worthy records. Steven Brzezinski said, sometime in the late 90s, I fell in love with the self-titled Face to Face album from 1996. I had a copy on cassette, courtesy of BMG's Monthly Music Club. And I listened to it a lot.
Nice.
Over the years, I've slowly acquainted myself with the majority of their catalog, yet Ignorance Is Bliss has remained a blind spot for me until now. So thanks, Darren. Now, I'm all for bands taking chances on pushing the boundaries of their sound, so I would never pan this record on that context alone. But this album not only finds the band sounding different, but it also puts forth a totally different mood and feel. They sound really sad to me on this album, which is the polar opposite of the material I know and love, which comes across as positive, upbeat, and really goddamn catchy. It wasn't until track 8, I Know What You Are, that I thought, okay, now this song actually feels like Face to Face to me. Gonna have to take this for another spin or two before I vote, as my first listen left me scratching my noggin. Scratching my noggin, name of my autobiography. If I was a betting man, I would wager that Tim and Jay only know the band by name and general association. God damn you, Steven Brzezinski. You're good.
Busted. Yeah.
So
It's
I'm
like
really
he's
curious.
listened to the show before.
Yeah, it's like he knows that we're frauds and we've never actually listened to any music and that we're just making this up as we go along. So I'm really curious to hear what they think of the album without the bias of being attached to previous albums in the band's discog. Excellent insight.
I love that point too.
In
actually.
a way, the album title, Ignorance is Bliss, is totally apropos.
It describes Tim and I.
It
Yeah.
does.
Blissfully ignorant.
Adam Rogan says, I only know Face to Face from the Big Choice album. I love the song Disconnected, but the rest of the album isn't for me. Now, this is more my style. The songwriting is great. The production is super clean while maintaining a noisy guitar sound. Where the album, this was a pleasant surprise. Nearly impossible. My favorite track, I would drop I Know What You Are and Bottle Rockets. Steven Brzezinski chimed in once more. After 2 full album listens, I can honestly say there are only 3 songs from this album that stand out to me. Nearly Impossible, I Know What You Are, and Run a Circle. So Adam and Steven are at opposite ends on the song I Know What You Are. I even listened to the bonus tracks to see if I could tack one of those on to make it more a respectable EP, but no dice. This album is too sad sounding, and so many of these songs just end up blending together for me. So this is a decent CD single for a better EP on technicality. I have a lot of love for Face to Face, so I'm gonna call it an EP with a bit of a sad face. I've heard this album called emo based on some of the reading I did, so maybe that's the sadness. Although,
yeah, I think that's cheap. I think that's lazy. But
it is. It is.
Yeah.
Speaking of lazy, let's go to Jay and find out what his thoughts are.
Let's go to the laziest person in this conversation.
No, we will have our poll results at the end of this episode. We'll find out who actually voted for Worthy Album, Better EP, and Decent Single. First, Jay, tell me one thing you liked about Ignorance Is Bliss by Face to Face.
This reminded me of a lot of early, I would say 2000s post-punk emo adjacent rock that I was super into, and kind of took me back to that time. I'm thinking like, hey, Mercedes as a band that came up quite a bit to me. There were also moments where their range can get into maybe even like a Shiner or Cave-In space. So it was this big guitar sound, really aggressive drums, and emotive vocals that I guess you could say are emo or emo adjacent, I suppose, but it's not whiny at all. You know, it's to me like almost crooning in a very deep, honest voice. I think his range is really quite good as well. So it was very emotive vocally, but not what I would consider a emo vocal, I guess, in a stereotypical sense. Like those bands, it's very dynamic. Lot of shape shifting riffs and like twists and turns, pauses, harmonics on the guitar. little bass runs. The guitar tones are interesting, in the way they play too. They'll be kind of chunky chords, but they'll also do some picking out, and things that are chimey and almost spacey. That there's some moments on here where it almost got to a failure kind of feel to me with like some of the note choices on guitar and some of the tones too. So I mean, it's a band that to me sounds powerful but melodic, which is what I'm looking for most of the time. And pretty hooky. I think songs like Overcome, Nearly Impossible. I think The Devil You Know to me is like, I don't know how that was not a hit song on the radio. That just to me hits me like right away. It's like, boom, this is a hit song. Like this should have been all over. So I think there's some legit hooks here. I think the last thing I would say that makes it, I think, stand out from maybe what I was expecting, what I would consider some other, let's say like a Blink 182, is just how good the bass and drums are in terms of like putting down a really like heavy groove. And I think the bass tone is great. I think the drums are also aggressive sounding, but not like a typical punk feel. They've got a backbeat to them. There's some really cool technical fills. So it just again gives it this weight, I think, from the rhythm section, both the bass playing, the bass tone, and the drum performance, where it's not like to me like a punk band, but also when they get in maybe some of the mid-tempo slow stuff, the drums are still very aggressive, so it doesn't completely kind of deflate and get too far out of character. Like it has this little bit of grit and aggression just because the drum playing and the drum tone is more, louder and, more open. So, I thought the performances were also pretty notable here too. What'd you like, Tim?
Well, accidentally, when I was, reading the Wikipedia page for the album, I went back and was scrolling through some of their previous records, and I looked at what they covered on the album that came out the same year, which is Standard and Practices. They covered the Smiths, In Excess, Sugar, the Psychedelic Furs, the Pixies, and they covered Planet of Sound by the Pixies, which is actually one of my favorite Pixie songs. They covered The Jam, Duran Duran, Big Country, and I thought that's really interesting that this band shifted their sound the same time that they were doing these covers, because I hear in this, like you mentioned, the crooning that Trevor Keith does, which is it falls somewhere between like Alan Epley of Shiner at times. It has a little bit of, it reminded me of is it Greg Gaffin? Is that the lead singer of Bad Religion? It reminded me a little bit of Bad Religion at times, but more melodic. And I heard in some of this not slower, because there's not anything that's like necessarily like slow, but in some of the more mid-tempo-y stuff, I could hear the influence of like some of these 80s bands that are alternative but not punk. They were, new wave or post-punk or whatever you want to call them. And I wonder how much that rubbed off on them deciding to change their sound to make basically an alternative rock record instead of a punk rock record. And I think it really pays off. I tend to like the noisier songs. So like, I Know What You Are, Apathetic. Like, I think those are really interesting. That's to me is the best use of their like twin guitar attack between Trevor Keith and Chad Yarrow. I like it when you can hear, because some of the songs, the guitars are doing two things, but they're both like one's playing a chord and maybe one is playing like an octave chord.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a lead per se. So it's not as dynamic as some of the other songs, like I mentioned, that have some really interesting lead stuff. Sometimes the lead stuff is just like noise, and it's just, or feedback, or these very abrasive notes. But I liked when I was able to distinguish between the two. His voice, like you mentioned, The Devil You Know. I mean, Jesus, that's a big ass song. That should be a big radio song. And Overcome, and there's just a ton of like big belted out choruses and vocals that the band that I heard at times was like a Hot Rod Circuit. In terms of the energy, in terms of the even his vocal cadence reminded me of the guy from Hot Rod Circuit. Not as shouty as Hot Rod Circuit would be at times.
Yeah. Not as spastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you though.
And I think that her Mercedes early 2000s sound, you know, you could call it the Vagrant record sound, to be honest.
Yeah.
Which is where they end up, and where Hey Mercedes released their first record. But there's so many good tight little rock songs on this that it feels like the people who heard this and went, oh well, this isn't punk anymore, I don't like it anymore, they missed out. Like if they didn't go back to this a couple years later and give it a second chance, I think they're missing out, because I think there's some really, really strong songwriting, and there's a couple of songs where they get a little overindulgent in terms of length, but I feel like this band hits it perfect when they're in like the 3:54 minute like mark, 4:25, something in there. Like I don't need them to be 2-minute long songs, because they got a lot to say musically that's really interesting. Yeah, there was a lot to dig about this record. Every player is really good. Everybody's doing it sounds cool. It's a big sound. It's, it doesn't sound, I think I'm happy that punk drum beat's not there.
Oh yeah. It's amazing that you can hear everybody too. Like you can hear the bass player, you can hear the drummer, you can hear all the drums. Mm-hmm. I going into this, I was expecting like you would hear snare drum, no kick, barely hear any bass, and that's not what it is at all. It's very well produced. It's got a distinct sound, but very well produced.
Yeah. Darren, what works best for you on this record?
Well, interestingly enough, similar to you guys, this album is my entry point into the band. I first heard it when I was in high school. I had a friend that was a punk drummer, and this was his favorite band. And this was the album that I got turned on to. And I just listened to an interview with Trevor Keith, lead singer, from the Top Toby Morris podcast from 2020, One Life, One Chance podcast. Really good. And he was talking about the album itself because it's been such a hot issue amongst the fan. And he said they purposely made a departure album and they veered away from their sound. It was a conscious effort, that it was their idea, no AR guys, no input from management. He said people just didn't get it at first. And he said he's very proud of this album, that he thinks it's a different side of them and the creativity. And he said they never worked harder on an album. And he said he was going on about how much their fans rejected it, but he thought to himself, or he said in this interview, he said, what's more punk rock than taking a hard left turn? And he said our fans just didn't see it that way. And he said this album really influenced the next album, which was Reactionary. And then he also said he thinks it's one of the best records they ever made and will be one of the crowning achievements for our career looking back. And this was the most interesting part, was he said they had to stop the Ignorance Is Bliss tour. He said people paid money to spit on them and throw things at them. And with 10 stops left in the tour, they actually pulled the plug on the tour and made up an excuse as to why. So I find all that stuff fascinating. And in 2012, Scott Shiflett and Trevor Keith went out on an acoustic tour and they did the album start to finish. So they don't play anything live off of it, but he said he would be open to doing that kind of thing again. And he thinks that, like, looking back, it's going to get more like favorable, opinions, and the fans have kind of softened on it over the years. But like I said, it was my entry point into the band. I love the dynamics. I love the vocals. I love the big shifts in sound. It's halfway through some of the songs. I love Pete Parada's drumming. He's now the drummer of Offspring, as a matter of fact. And yeah, I don't know. It's like, to me, it just, when I heard they were a punk band and then I heard this, I'm like, okay, this is not what I think a punk band is. I love the big hooks. There's some seriously big, huge stadium choruses. I even think some of the verses are very hooky as well. I like the mid-tempo rockers. I love Pathetic as a super freak out heavy track. I love the guitar tones. There's so much I love about this album. I think it's daring. I think it's bold, and I applaud them for making this a brave choice and taking a creative direction like this. So.
It's mind-blowing to me coming to the record without that context to think of this as controversial in any way.
Yeah. Well, if you go back and you listen to the 1996 self-titled, you can hear it's a drastic shift in sound. It's huge. But to think that punk fans would be that close-minded, I don't know. That's something I have a hard time with. But
yeah, wild. You're on mute, Tim.
Sorry, if you go to like Amazon and read the reviews, there are still people in 2021 who are like, this is the worst face-to-face album.
So he re-released it on vinyl on Antagonist Records. That's his album. It's sold out. Can't get a copy of it right now. So he said that he's had fans come up to him saying, like, that's a great album. Why don't you play anything off of it? But he goes, I feel like some of those people are the same people 20 years ago that were throwing things at me. So,
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, if you were expecting, a punk record and you get, a song like Nearly Impossible, could be
Yeah.
You could slap Liam Gallagher on that, and that's an Oasis song. I mean, it's a huge, big guitar sound, mid-tempo, kind of like bopping along. That could have been on Be Here Now. I mean, there is a wide swath of sounds on this album that, you know, they could have made it could have all sound like Fugazi, and you'd be like, okay, well, this is their post-punk record. This is their Discord record. But they really pushed a lot of little interesting things here and there that make it much more listenable, I think.
Well, it's funny you say that about Oasis, because that was my notes for track 11, Lost. I put simple ballad, simple repetitive lyrics. Hooky gives me Oasis vibes. Short, sweet little guitar solo. So I had that for track 11. So I find that interesting that you said that about.
That's another one. When he sing some of the chorus stuff.
He kept some of the songs to like 2 lines, and he just kept repeating. I don't know. I thought it was very effective. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just interesting choices. I love the choices on this record.
Yeah, I agree. Jay, what doesn't work for you on the record?
Well, the band that I thought of immediately, actually before, the post-punk emo stuff, was Foo Fighters. And I'm talking about modern, current Foo Fighters, right? So, and this felt like an oh shit, like this is what the Foo Fighters are trying to do, like taking a punk ethos but creating really commercial songs. But there's like this underbelly energy and sort of work ethic and sort of belief that Dave Grohl has had in both who he gets in the band, getting Chris Shiflett, for example, and Pat Smear, people who have like punk credibility, but then repackaging it in a much more accessible sound. Even the drummer sounds like Taylor Hawkins at times to me. So that was like a first touchdown. Now the thing and it sort of helped me understand like even more about the Foo Fighters than I maybe had understood. So the thing that doesn't work for them is actually the same thing that doesn't work for me with the Foo Fighters, is that it's almost so perfect, like such a perfect balance of everything, that it can come off at times a little homogenized. Like I think it saves itself because there's so many compelling moments that it pulls you back in, or at least for me, it was pulling me back in. But there would be, portions of the record where I would sort of float off and just get that kind of like, oh, this sounds like a Foo Fighters record. That makes sense. Like, sounds a little vanilla. So I think that's the only critical thing I can say, is that there are some moments in parts of this record where it starts to get in that space. And obviously the Foo Fighters are an incredibly successful band, and a lot of people don't have that same critique as I have about them, but it hit me in the same way that sometimes listening to the Foo Fighters records hit me. So minor critique. I think overall, I'll get to my rating, but that was the only negative I had. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I think the thing that I was just missing, and it's just across, like half the record, I wanted some more lead guitar stuff. I don't need solos. I don't need, big showy stuff. But we talked about bands like Hot Rod Circuit and Hey Mercedes. Hot Rod Circuit had some really, really cool lead stuff, like very inventive. And it's not complicated, but they just made some really interesting choices as far as leads go, and playing with 2 guitars and how they can bounce stuff off of each other. And I don't feel like there is as much on this record as I would like to hear. Some of the times it's there. You mentioned a little solo in Lost. There's some noisy stuff that happens in a couple of the songs. But I feel like there are some verses where I would have liked to have heard a counter melody to the vocal or something. It just didn't happen in spots where I wanted it to happen. And it did get a little like samey in some spots where I was like, am I in the first half of this record still, or where am I in the back half?
Yeah.
So that was just a nitpick from me, because overall I think it's a strong record, but I just wanted some more, that's like you mentioned Failure. one of the things I always look forward to in failure is like, what messed up lead is going to be in this song. I know there's going to be like 3 notes that are in order, and then there's going to be one really bizarre note in there. And that's one of the things I anticipate with that band, is that there's going to be some really cool lead guitar stuff. And that just didn't happen here, and I was missing that. Same with Shiner. I mean, Shiner's got all sorts of weird guitar things happening in their songs, and time signatures and whatnot. So, and I know when you're going from like sort of a punk band, that a lot of those bands don't utilize the second guitar in the same way that a post-punk band would. So that was my only real complaint. Darren, is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record after having listened to it for 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple tracks I could kind of do without. Probably, I think Run in Circles was kind of like, you know, I said my note was kind of like punkier song, but, you know, a couple heavier breakdowns, but I don't know, it just kind of meh to me. And I kind of felt that way too about, actually, maybe that's the only one. I don't know. I really feel like it holds up after repeated listens. And I think there's little nuances that kind of stick out the more you listen to it. I even have like detailed notes of when things shift and what point of the song. And I find like some songs can kind of sound like they're going to go the same way for the whole entire song, and then they do something to really change it up. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of critiques of the album, to be honest with you. I love the drums. I love the rhythm. I love the vocals. I love the different things they do with the vocals and the melodies and harmonies. I don't know. I don't have a lot of complaints about it. Maybe it's a little too, like you said, Tim, a few of the songs are probably could be a little shorter, but overall, I don't know. I think it's a fantastic album.
I think it sounds good, and the band self-produced it, which is kind of impressive.
That's very impressive.
Because usually you'd be fighting over to push your instrument the loudest.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's actually very impressive. I mean, there's some things going on sonically here that could have been a disaster. What they're trying to pull off is at times actually very difficult to pull off, and it's produced very well.
I should mention,
Jay, do you hear? Sorry, Tim.
Trevor
Jay,
and Scott produced it along with Chad Blinman, who is, I guess they brought in as far as engineering and mixing as well. So sorry, go ahead, Darren.
That's okay. Jay, do you hear early Lonely the Brave in this? I do.
Yeah.
Like, big time.
Yeah.
Big
I
time.
can hear that.
The first singer, like I hear like pretty strong actually. And I was kind of surprised by that when I kind of started kind of thinking like, what can I kind of like link this to in like newer groups, or, you know, like, but yeah, I don't know. I got to see them on the Reactionary tour, which was November 2000 in Ottawa at a little club for $20. And they didn't play a single song off Ignorance Is Bliss. It's like that album never existed. It was strange. And it was not even a full year, well, a little bit over a year after it was released. So,
what do you make of Steven's comments about the lyrical change?
I love it. He was 30 when he wrote this album.
Yeah.
Right? Fourth album. He's talked about that too. He was very self-reflective when he wrote it. I don't necessarily feel sadness. I feel like somebody that's being kind of like honest with himself, and I love the lyrics. I think they're a little deeper, and I like that. I don't think they're just surface and throwaway. And he even said in the interview I listened to, he takes time to really consider what he's writing, that lyrics do matter to him. And they wanted to say something. They wanted to make a statement with this album. And I don't know. I'm not saddened by it. I don't know. Maybe some people get that vibe, but I don't get that necessarily.
It didn't hit me as overly sad. I mean, I don't know. It certainly wasn't what I would describe as typical emo either, like either vocal or lyrically. It didn't feel that.
Well, and I mean,
melodramatic.
We throw that term around too loosely. I mean, Radiohead writes very emotive songs. We don't call them emo. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I think with that term gets thrown around way too loosely. But just because something's emotive, as in somebody's being confessional or what have you, I don't think it necessarily deserves that tag.
We're all emo sometimes.
Well, of course. But yeah, no, I don't know. Overall, I have a hard time finding issue with this album. I mean, Pete Parada made such a big difference, I think, as a drummer. Like, if you listen to the 1996 record, and then you listen to this one, there's a big change. There's a big change in the dynamics and how he pushes, and, like some really cool drum fills and breakdowns. And, I think he knows when to lean back too. And that's so key. So I love that.
Let's talk about our ratings on this record. We'll share the poll in a moment, but Jay, where do you land? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I'm at a worthy album. I have to say I'm near a perfect album. I think the criticism I had about it feeling a little bit vanilla or just getting a little lost in the record at times. I think what would make it perfect is maybe trim it down a track or two, maybe lose something like maybe Next Time, shorten maybe a song here or there. I'm with you on throw just a couple more, maybe a little weird guitar things in to just help shake you up even a little bit more. But man, I'm looking at my notes here, and what I do when I take notes is if, I like the track, I bold it. I mean, I've got every track bolded except for the last one. So that's for a 13 track record. That is notable for me. I don't usually have, 12 out of 13 songs bolded. So it's a worthy album for me.
Jay, I agree with you. I think it's a worthy record. There's not a bad song on here. I would, if you want to trim it up for length, because it's over 50 minutes, it's 52 minutes, you could do that. You might want to drop, one or two songs, but I honestly, like, there's not one stinker on the album. But yeah, I just would like a little bit more guitar wizardry. Just give me a weird effect here or there.
Yeah. I mean, it has some moments. I'm thinking it needs twice as many as it has now.
Right. Yeah. Darren?
Oh, it's a worthy album for me for sure. And guitar effects. I don't know. I've got some notes on that. Overcome, the first track. I love the outro effect that they do. They make this like weird crackling kind of, sound. And I don't know, I love the chiminess, Nearly Impossible. They have a wavy guitar intro in the beginning, guitar solo at 320. Like, I don't know. I almost wonder if less is more in this case.
I'll tell you what, I'll sit down with this. I will play my guitar. I'll do what Steve McDonald did with Red Blood Cells and White Blood Cells, or whatever that record was that he played bass on it, by the White Stripes. And I'll just lay down some sweet licks.
There you go. No, I don't know. I think there's some huge choruses on here. Heart of Hearts, there's like a vocal round. He uses his own vocals to do like a vocal round, which I think is really friggin' cool. How often do you hear that?
Yeah.
you know, like Devil You Know. I mean, like you guys said, that's a hit song. I don't.
It was
care
on a
what anybody
soundtrack.
says.
It was on the Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Okay.
TV soundtrack, I think.
And 10, Pathetic just kicks my ass. The heavy breakdown at 227.
Yeah, it's a good song.
The guitar sound at 228. It's just like, I don't know. And I think maybe one too many ballads. That would be like my biggest complaint. But they're nice ballads, though. I don't know. Like it's maybe a resequencing of the album, but I don't know. It's a worthy album to me. It holds up. And at first, it had some hooks. I remember listening to it, and I kind of put it down for a while, and then I'd pick it up every once in a while and kind of almost listen to it in the background, and things would catch my ear, if you know what I mean. And yeah, it's grown on me, and it's grown on me. So, worthy album all the way.
It is a bit of a grower in that way too. Like I think first couple listens, I was like, oh, this is cool, but I wasn't really coming away with memorable hooks or anything. And it took maybe 3-4 listens where it was like, oh wow, that's really cool. And like found myself getting deeper into the record.
I concur. And our patrons concurred. 78% went with a worthy album. 22% with better EP. Nobody chose decent single. Steven Musinski thought better of it. And so that's a pretty big difference there. 78% with worthy album. So I think this pairs well with your pick from last year, The Age of Electric.
A little bit on a hot streak here.
You are.
Yeah. 2's a streak, right?
It is.
It is. Don't break it.
Oh, no pressure for next year. None.
Well, thank you for bringing this record to us, Darren. I'm glad we finally got to talk about this band.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, with Tim, we don't have to pretend like we've heard this band before.
Yeah.
Because we have.
The problem is in like 3 years, I'll completely forget about the fact that we did this. And I'll be like, didn't we review Face to Face? And what the hell do they sound like? Because my brain is slowly melting. That's just happening. But if you would like to suggest an album for this podcast, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com, throw an album in our suggestion form, and it'll reach our team of monkeys that control all the albums that get suggested, and they will use their 10,000 typewriters to create a playlist or a poll for us in the future. We're running weekly polls now. We're like goddamn Rasmussen over here. And
we got a lot of records to dig up. Got work to do over here.
Over 300 in our hopper, right, Jay?
There is, yes.
So,
and counting.
300 and counting. More came in today. More will come in tomorrow. It's just how it happens. And we'll eventually get them all into polls. That's why we're running them weekly now. We're running it tournament style at the end of each month. The winner of each week face off, and they fight for the privilege of being discussed by us.
Face to face, if you will.
Yeah, a couple of ignoramuses who are
face to virtual face.
Yes. Patreon is where you go to vote in those polls. It's where you go to vote in not only the polls for the records, but for depending on what level you're at, you can vote in roundtable polls, which we do every month. And then also you can check out our bonus content like 80s episodes, which we'll be doing a new 80s episode this month. And you can read the box newsletter there, which comes out every week. Sign up at digmeoutpodcast.com. Get it delivered to your email inbox. 2 new reviews every week, plus our release calendar, movies, music, TV shows, books relevant to 80s and 90s music that we cover. And finally, Apple Podcasts is where you go if you like what you heard and you'd like to leave us some positive feedback. So for Jay, I'm Tim, we're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.